And we're going to call that enough for now. Alrighty. On to live chat. Hello. Don't know if anybody has showed up yet, because nope, apparently not. Here is our coding stream. Freeze my face. Hello, 3 people who are here. And I have a number of different plans, some of which I may be able to pursue, and some of which I can either show you or tell you about. Dusan Spasic, hey there. And I'm still fussing with my stuff, as always. So let's give us the chat window. There are people here. If I sound a little hoarse, apologies for that. My health doesn't always stand up over winters, but we'll do our level best. With a bit of luck, I'll be doing a bunch of coding, and it won't matter if I can't talk. So here's what I've been up to lately. As you probably know, I put out Console 7 Cascade, and you should try that. It is good. Console 7 Cascade is like an add-on to Console, except for that you get to do way more gain. I keep staring at my damn face on this. Every time you have your face on the screen and it moves, you're like, it me, Ermagerd, it me, and it's the worst. It's just the worst. So yeah, Console. I should make a blinking, flashing light for where the actual camera lens is. Maybe that would work. Or like a tiny OLED screen, you put your face on that, but it's like right next to the lens. That might work too. But in the absence of that, let's just do our level best with it. So yeah, Console 7 Cascade. That's probably what I'm going to be using on drum tracks for whatever jams and music I do. And I'm in a agonizing reappraisal phase because I'm trying to figure out whether I currently like playing old school instruments more than running the synthesizers that I always run. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Because the thing is, I'm really interested in new music. But I mean, new music is only new until it's old again. And the question becomes, like, are people going to want an 808 kick and some bleepy noises for the rest of eternity? I enjoy making stuff like that, or at least vaguely like that. But that doesn't automatically mean it's what I need to be focusing on. And I do have the capacity of playing like guitars and basses and things, although I spend so much time not doing it that I get really stale. Both of the Console 7 videos have used me jamming very briefly. And even jamming very briefly, I kind of overarranged. So I'm wondering whether maybe it would make better sense to work out a little more in advance some stuff where I can be more in the DAW like most people are and do some stuff that's based around using the power of the console system to sound good with not enormous mixes, like fewer elements. Because that's one of the secrets, there's a reason why the old Stax records, people freaked out because Motown freaked out because they were like, I can't get my stuff as loud as these Stax records. What the hell is going on? And the reason was because Motown had more elements in their arrangements, and Stax would have like a bass and a guitar and some drums and nothing else. And so their mixes ended up sounding louder on the radio because there were fewer elements. And that's also one of the reasons to work on like tracking and recording and stuff. I've talked about how I like doing recordings, and honestly, you can do some of the old school recordings and sort of turn that to your advantage. Like you do a recording where you only have one microphone. So you put the microphone across the room from the drum kit and bash away. And then instantly you get a very particular style of old school that has an enormous quantity of character and a lot of good things about it. And if you're okay with being incredibly low budget, you do it with like an SM57 and it sounds like ass, but you were able to do it, and there are certain things about that that work. That's like the original jam that I did with all of the heavy metal guitars and stuff on it. And that is like 57s on the guitars, 57s on the drums, all over the place. And in a lot of ways, it sounds like ass. But I replaced all of those things with, again, I don't get these from the company, and they're not giving me anything for it. But friends of mine in the pro music industry, like some really big name engineers, I only know about because A, I'm kind of old, and B, I've been doing the Airwindows thing for a while, then people noticed enough that I got invited into some of the circles. That's the only reason why. I never worked with them or anything. But some of them were tipping me off to the Roswell stuff and Roswell audio. And as you know, I do my videos with a Roswell Colaris, which is like the Elam imitation. And the Elams are like $20,000 microphones that you can't possibly have. And the Colaris is like a $3,000 microphone that you still probably can't have. But they also make the K47, the mini K47, and that's like a $400 or so, $300-$400 microphone, if I'm remembering correctly. So my guitars and drums are now with that. I do have the fancier one, Hebo. I do have the fancier one, and I actually used it on room sounds. One of the things I'm going to be working on over the next week, particularly if I end up looking into some of this tracking more, rather than having to do everything like in synthesizers, is I've got some mirrors in this room that are bouncing around the light that I'm illuminating myself with. And it's cool, but I don't think it's that effective as a technique. It's getting bounce lighting, but I'm not sure it's that important. And I used to have them up behind my wood stove in the corner of the room. It made the room feel a lot bigger because I had just these big mirror spaces sort of in the back of the room, making it seem like the room just went on into the distance. So now I've got a couple of these giant mirrors just sitting around. They're just, Home Depot type stuff, like 36 inch by 36 inch, or there's a 36 inch by 30 inch mirror as well. And off my little drum room is a area of corridor upstairs. It's the upstairs to bedrooms and stuff. This is my big advantage, is I live in a space I can use. Some of this I would not be able to do without it. Maybe that's part of why I'm doing the synthesizer stuff so much, because I feel kind of like, well, people can't do the jamming with drums and things like I do, so why would I be doing it if I'm just showing people stuff they can't have normally? Not to say you couldn't go to a place and record or whatever. But by the same token, it's like, well, but if I can do that and I can make samples or whatever, then maybe I should, rather than stick only to Like the extreme of that would be going to purely VCV rack and working with only stuff that costs no money and that people could just plain have. And I'm powerfully drawn to that state of mind. But I also should take advantage of the things that I can do and maybe share that aren't as easily done. Like, my head is really spinning with a lot of ideas today, I gotta tell you. So bear with me. This might feel a little bit scattered. Hey, Andy. Funny, on seeing you, Andy, I just got reminded, I just checked on, if you remember, I used to do the Minecraft streaming, and I had like differences of political opinion with the folks who I was doing that with. They were like getting together and talking stuff that they didn't think I would want to hear because it was woof. And for a while there, I thought that maybe somebody had gotten into my Minecraft account because I wasn't being able to log into it and it seemed busted. And part of that was because Mojang's password reset wasn't working. Well, the other day I tried again and I still couldn't get any of the passwords. I'm like, oh no, is password broken? And then I got into the password reset. And this time, Microsoft/Mojang's password reset worked and was able to log into the thing. And the requirements for the password that they had were like, okay, numbers and special characters and stuff. And I was like, wait a minute, I bet you nothing was ever wrong. I was just being a insane paranoid person and freaking out. Well, not really freaking out. I wouldn't say that I got that into this line of speculation. But clearly I had to change the password and forgot and didn't write it down. Because what was there seemed like I had changed it and not written it down. So yeah. Let me have a quick look at chat while I'm at it, seeing as we're doing this talking and stuff. And I'm trying to cover all of the things that are floating around in Chris World lately. One of them is you're probably going to see me in that bathrobe over the next week or so because it's going to get really cold out here. Bose, all-pass reverbs, their filters. They're all about phase shifting, but all passes won't actually do pitch shifting per se. All passes are not changing the speed of the delays as they go. Although technically, I'm not sure there's a reason why you couldn't. That's an interesting idea. I'm not sure why you couldn't do a all pass that was also pitch bending. That's an interesting idea. I'm kind of tied to my microphone, but let me grab my sheaf of papers and note that down. While I'm at it, I'll find a piece of paper that has spare room on it. That's the one I was going to do today. And all pass that modulates. Because that's the thing. I have not tried to do that, but I don't see a reason why it wouldn't work. And it would make it weird because an all pass is not a simple delay. So it's not a simple comb filter. And yeah, that's clearly we need to fool with that. Especially since in the reverb stuff we've been doing over the last few months, there's that distinction between doing a nice smooth interpolation, which kills highs, or doing the quantized to individual samples modulation, which introduces noise and sparkle. Oh, I think is it near future, or do they already require it? I mean, I already have to have one anyway because I'm compiling a Windows VST, so I suppose I could use that. Yeah, no, I do not agree. I don't think that they do pitch shift by default. I would be really surprised if they did, because they're not modulating the pitch change in them. And what you'd need to do, I believe, maybe I'm like totally wrong. I feel pretty confident about this though, is what you'd need to do is change the delay time as you went. But it does require a delay time. So it seems like that would actually be a thing. Ahmed's asking what happened next. As far as the Microsoft password thing, they sent me the password reset. I reset it, and through seeing the requirements, I went, oh, nobody ever hijacked I forgot the password. I had written the wrong one down. That's all. But so follow up is I'm toying with the idea of getting that laptop. You remember the one where I was running the Minecraft server on it, and then when I abandoned all that stuff, I pretty much haven't touched that since. Well, we can get it back if people want it badly enough, or people are willing to catch up with me and do that. Like, get a couple of people who are willing to commit to it, and we'll see. I also thought about, like, yeah, maybe I'll just do a completely private one and I'll hang out and only talk to folks. I don't know. I mean, like, I don't play and I don't rest. And if I sleep too much, my eye gets screwed up. So, challenges. But that laptop has been sitting this whole time unused because I tried to use it to compile the Linux VSTs and they weren't working right. I compiled the Linux VSTs using it, and it sure enough worked a lot faster. And then the version of Linux that I'm running in that situation stopped working for people, and there's no point compiling Linux VSTs if they are not functional. So I had to go back to the virtual machine. I had a weird time doing the Console 7 Cascade plugin. All of a sudden, the Microsoft build environment in Windows 7 in the virtual machine was constantly crashing. It didn't want to work anymore. I was like, oh no, am I screwed? Am I never going to be able to do a Windows VST again because this has all died and I don't really have access to my little brother who has gone all Trump dude or something. I'm not exactly sure what's up with him. I suppose we'll find out eventually. But even when I did have access to him, he wasn't really the primary person to help me set up that environment. He just kind of knew enough about it. But other people had to pitch in to get me rolling with VST, and people are pretty much generally just not forthcoming. People will not help you do this kind of stuff. So if that whole environment dies, nobody will help me fix it, and that's bad. But then I noticed that I had Wi-Fi enabled. So what was happening was I habitually run the Windows and the Linux virtual machines isolated from the internet so that they can't change, they can't update themselves, they can't do any of that stuff. And for whatever reason, I had failed to do this. And the Windows installation and Visual Studio Community Edition were talking to the internet and breaking themselves. But I had backups. So I and it downloaded like 500 megs of crap of some kind and gone into a state where it just crashed. But I had a backup, so I reinstalled the backup. And after I had done that, that was when I noticed, oh, look, Wi-Fi's on. It's talking to the internet. And so I had to reinstall the backup again after that. But in so doing, I have fair confidence that I'll be able to continue going forward with the Windows builds because I think I can roll it back to where things were working and just not let it connect to the internet. I always thought that was what was going to happen, and sure enough, that's what started happening, is I let it talk to the internet, and it killed itself. Because it wants me to be running Windows 10 and only to develop for, well, Microsoft is not so much. I get this from my little brother, and I believe him on this matter. Microsoft is not so much about killing all backward compatibility for things to force people to buy new stuff. Apple is, and that's bad, but Microsoft not so much. But they're into killing their old OSs, so you're forced to update to Windows 10 so that they can monitor you more closely. and I don't like any of that stuff. So it's been a busy couple of weeks, I'll tell you. Let me have a look at chat. And yeah, I was talking about mirrors because what I'm probably going to do, the recording that I did that you've been hearing over the last couple of weeks, which is all hacky and cheesy musically, is drums are recorded using 3 Roswell Mini K47s and the Colaris. The Mini K47s are on either side of the drum kit, and one is behind the drum kit recording the kick. That kick is not inside the kick or in front of the kit, but literally behind the kit, so my body is blocking it from the snare. And it's turned out to be an I have not seen anybody actually do that, but it seems to be working as near as I can tell. And I'm particularly excited about using Console 7 Cascade to distort basically all the drum mics, because I started getting into this very Bonham-y, like I do have the lined with tinfoil, but then overdriving all the channels started getting me a really brutal, aggressive drum sound, but it was still weighty, it was still heavy. And I was starting to really recognize, like, this is getting into a zone where I absolutely like where this is going. And part of that was I had the door of the drum room cracked open, feeding into this corridor with nothing much in it, and I can close doors and have it just be an empty corridor into a sort of an empty hallway. And then downstairs, and I had the Colaris, although I could use any mic, but I had the Colaris pointing at the stairs. So the vocal mic that I'm using for recording the plugin videos that you see in the plugin videos was being a fancy room mic. Well, you don't necessarily have to use plugins to do things. Sometimes it's good to do things in more radical, experimental ways. I have these spare mirrors kicking around that was just like home decoration, making the place be lighter. Also, I was trying to make this room be liver by having glass surfaces in there, because there's big openings to the rest of the house, so the sound will dissipate. But I wanted the early reflections to be a little brighter. And I'm currently using diffusers for that. And I could take these mirrors and put them all in that hallway, meaning that drum room type stuff where I'm playing drums in this room and it's got the close mics on it. I have some doors that are bolted together to make a large gobo. A gobo is like a tall thing that blocks sound, and it can have damping on one side or not. In this case, this is a gobo that doesn't actually have damping. It's just wooden doors bolted together, sort of drums here, here, and then folded out so that it's a sort of hemispherical, to the extent that 3 doors bolted together can be hemispherical. And that's boxing in the drums in a way where it's not an enclosed space, but there's some early reflections in there. And you've heard it in the recordings. It's working fairly well. It doesn't sound like a tiny boxy room anymore. It's more complicated than that. And then if the sound got out through a cracked open door, and then the hallway in there had like glass mirrors in it, that would make my drum room sound be a lot brighter and liver and more interesting than just, drywall and corridor. Plus, if I wasn't going to be jamming in exactly the same way that I've been doing for the last few years, I could literally move my guitar cab, as in the speaker that I'm running the guitar through, up into the drum room without a ISO box, which I currently have it in a crude ISO box. And that would end up being a little bit more open. I could still use the Mini K47 that I'm using on it. And then crack the door open on that and the corridor and the mirrors in the corridor would make there be a acoustic sort of ambience tone around the guitar sound as well, which would also count for a ambience tone around the top end of the bass sound, because my bass is, and any two pickup bass would work for this. My bass sound is a sort of DI going through a sort of Sans amp on the neck pickup, the bass pickup, and then the bright pickup is going into the guitar amp. Pretty ordinary guitar amp. For that kind of Chris Squire definition plus beef kind of thing, just making it be a bigger bass sound. And clearly, yeah, that's a lot of stuff. So that's where the mention of the mirrors comes in, is trying to do that. I'll also tell you I have been seriously distracted by some other things going on. One of which actually I mentioned in the video, but Evan, you mentioned what is your favorite rock band of all time. I'm going to say probably yes. Although I gotta say, I think Led Zeppelin made some amazing sounds and so on. There's Jethro Tull have been popular with me. And that's why I'm so into the bass stuff that I talk about, is trying to build a sound out of instruments, usually sort of Franken instruments and stuff. Like even my Rick, I have a real Rickenbacker now, which is a big deal because I never did before. And even that is a bit of a Franken, because it's not really a collectible quality instrument. Instead, it's like a 4000 or something that somebody put a neck pickup in for some reason. So it's been kind of hot rodded. I recently adjusted the truss rod of it, which is a dangerous procedure, but I pulled it off. I had to loosen it very slightly, and I did it in such a way where nothing bad happened. So go me. Another question about reverbs. As long as I'm chattering away like mad, I'll probably get to at least start the next plugin idea before the end of this stream. It's only been half an hour, but this will be a big chattering stream, because this is one of those times, like, this is my second cup of coffee today, and there's good reason to be trying to keep up with all that's going on. Second question about reverbs. Has anybody combined all pass plus a regular algo in one reverb? Yeah, Freeverb already has all pass in it. Using all pass is normal. It's very much more common for there to be a configuration of all pass modules and comb filter modules in a single reverb, and it's the way that you arrange it. It's why this business of the householder algorithm has been so interesting to me. Because it's like, oh, hey, here is a arrangement where you have this set of 4 things, and you feed the output of all of them into all of them in this particular way, all at unity gain, and you just flip the phase of some of them, and it winds up being a perfect infinite reverb that doesn't go wrong or break or go crazy. I was like, wow, that's a really cool discovery. And the neatness and the fact that you don't have the gain trim built into it. And even if you do, it's a divide by, 4 or 2 kind of thing. So it is a word length shift. And that means that you're not losing resolution on the mantissa. You're just changing the exponent. So in floating point terms, that is ultimate tone quality. And it's normal to combine all pass and comb filters. That's how most reverbs are made. That's what makes it interesting. Like if you know how to do the all pass, which is a simple little sort of module, and you know how to do the comb filter, which is a delay. Comb filter is a delay that is combined with the original sound. That's pretty, hey Lorenzo, that is pretty much all that is. So you can do them in parallel, you can do them in series, all that kind of stuff. But when people talk about comb filters, all that means is I did a delay and I mixed the output. If you want the most extreme case of comb filtering, you would be combining the delay with dry. And I'm trying to think of whether that's actually how that's done, or whether we're more talking like different delays combining with each other. But if different delays or dry are combining at equal volumes, you wind up getting cancellations, and the cancellations are literally comb filtering. So that's how that works, is introduce a delayed element at equal volume, and it will produce this type of effect. And then if you have feedback on the end, it just multiplies everything out. And the cool thing about the householder algorithm is that it feeds back everything into everything else and just continues indefinitely. But the way it's configured, you don't wind up getting a runaway at any one frequency. It just continues to go. So the longer it goes, you end up getting essentially an infinite number of delay taps as they keep feeding back into each other. I think. Yeah, because they end up having to go into each other. Eventually, you're going to get a complete wash. It's the early reflections where you wind up wanting the all passes, because before then... Oh, Andy, now that you were back in Talking Amp, try Console 7 Cascade with a impulse response cab simulation thing on the end of it, like from somewhere. There's so many of those around that I'm not really worried about that part. I am not certain as to whether it's beneficial for me to do a version of that, although I do have in the pile of things that I must do a plugin called Cabs that was my intention to make a special impulse response based thing that was a cab simulation. I just don't think it's very good. I don't think my cab simulation is very good. Maybe I'll be able to improve it. But yeah, my feeling is that my cab simulation was inefficient and bad and didn't sound very good. But anything like that, try running Console 7 Cascade into it. Because I have a feeling that maybe that is the path towards being able to do amp sims. So that's what you need to do. Try that, get back to me. Possibly run like biquad high pass into it, which would be also part of the equation. I don't think I'd have to do a very steep high pass, but I probably would have to goose up the energy in the highs to get a proper sound. Otherwise, it'll be just too bassy. And there's also a possibility of running a notch filter. Doing it where you've got like your Console 7 Cascade style thing. And then rather than just rolling off lows, which will get you like your Fendery type sounds and some stuff like that, if you needed to get your modern nu metal type sounds, but still wanted it to be warm rather than just plain using somebody else's amp sim, it might work to notch out some of the mids. I just don't know how effective that would be. Speaking of notches, I am waiting on something. And it is the kind of something where I could quite easily make a plugin of it, but I want this as a real thing. And it also gets back to talking about, my favorite band, Yes. By the way, let me know if I'm blowing up the audio. I just noticed I'm a bit loud. We'll scooch the microphone down a bit. There we go. I learned that the album Close to the Edge, which is a favorite album of mine as far as Yes goes. Like, Yes were really at a peak with Fragile and Close to the Edge. those albums probably saved my life. I was extremely into them when I was younger. I still have them on vinyl. By the way, as far as the vinyl records and stuff, I have had an idea, so get back to me on this one. I think Bo would be interested in what I'm talking to about for this. There are people who are doing reaction videos to some of these things. So if you can find a reaction video by Andy and Alex and Just JP of the same Evergreen Records style thing, and arguably anybody else, like the Twins, Twins is the New Groove, also do this kind of stuff. But the thing about Andy and Alex is that they're these kids down in Florida who seem to be into the progressive rock type stuff, and my record collection, they're all over it. And Just JP has another channel where he does all of these things, but he has this dedicated channel, which is Just JP, and seems to be focusing on progressive rock to a huge extent. Like, he's doing all of this. He's doing, like, what's that band? Oh, God. Bear with me. Dead air. Van der Graaf Generator, like Pawn Hearts. This dude's doing a react of that. That is so far from the mainstream, it boggles the mind. That's a crazy progressive band which includes a saxophone player that's capable of playing two saxophones at once in a riff. You'd think only Captain Beefheart could do that, but no. And Just JP has covered that stuff. So I would say with some confidence that of all the stuff that I've done in the Evergreen Records thing that I did, where I was started to do it on YouTube and then immediately got smacked off of YouTube by copyright claims. If you can find stuff that both Andy and Alex and Just JP have done, bring it to my attention and tell me, do a react of this. Do a react of this album that both of these YouTubers have extant react videos on. Because the thing about both of these guys that is important is, and I can use their format if all this works and it'll be awesome, they are doing a full listen through of the song in silence. Unlike Twins is the New Groove, both Andy and Alex and Just JP have a practice of, they'll say, we're doing this song, we're doing like Jethro Tull or this or that or the other thing. They've done, yes, and they put this stuff on and they listen. And they play it the whole way through. And then they talk about it. Now, the records that you can do that on are also records that I could do that on, assuming I have the vinyl of. But usually, well, not usually, a bunch of these ones I would. So I could do a dedicated vinyl-based thing of those particular things, and then talk much like I've been doing for the Evergreen podcast stuff, which hasn't happened for some time, as a video on Airwindows. And it would help make the case of, like, these are the sounds that you can get and what I work towards. And this is also what's lost, because one of the things about Just JP that drives me crazy is I think he might actually be running processing on his audio bus. I'm not positive, but in some of his Yes videos, he's doing the song, but it's compressed so much that, like, he'll do Heart of the Sunrise, and quietest little details are louder than the full band. And I've commented on some of his videos at times of, like, you're missing out. You have no idea how this actually goes. So I'm putting you on notice. I'm just saying it, and then I'll move on to another topic. Bug me about bringing back evergreens and bringing back doing a vinyl react and putting that stuff out for things that you have found on these two YouTube channels that's on both of them. Because these guys are testing the waters for me. We know, and they experience routinely, that they try to do a video and then they get a copyright strike and they have to pull it, they have to re-edit their videos. I ain't going to be doing that kind of stuff. But there are things that both of them can do that the entire music is playing throughout it, and the copyright holders have allowed it because it is fair use. This stuff is fair use. I think the problem with that is that's Zappa. And Zappa's not necessarily good with copyright. So that's why I'm saying you must find examples where, at least two, ideally more, YouTubers are playing these things throughout, playing the entire thing from beginning to end on their video, and they're being allowed to do it. Because if they can do it, I can do it. That's what I'm saying. So yeah. And Forrest, no, you're mistaken. By that I mean, I do not plan to add infrasonic. You're very close though. And neither do I technically plan to add ultrasonic, which is what I was... If I said infrasonic, it was a mistake. Although technically I do either plan or have already added biquad high-pass filtering to those. And I wouldn't be terribly surprised if DEC Reca has... Because the thing about DEC Reca and DRes 2 is they're using a bit crushing algorithm. And there are circumstances where the bit crushing algorithm can sit on a off balance state. Some of those things I'm not going to be able to revisit. Particularly DRes 2 is challenging. As I remember it, you can use hard, but the algorithm can start freaking out in such a way that you have to be able to work with the thing. It's like using some kind of Eurorack module where it'll start freaking out and spazzing and making horrible noises, so you have to be able to manipulate it in such a way that, okay, now you shut up now. After we're finished going, we put this back to hard at 0 or hard at 100. And you might need to do that in the automation because it's a bit of a wild beast. Oh, goodness gracious me, yes. I started talking about notch filters. One of the things that has me kind of off balance this week, because this is a thing that happens to me every time, it really is, if I am trying to set something up and it is in process and lingering in an unfinished state, it rents space in my head and I have a harder time functioning because I'm trying to keep up with what's going on there. I mentioned yes. I mentioned Close to the Edge and Fragile. I mentioned that I liked Yes as the rock band that I like. I learned a new thing about Close to the Edge, which is that I always thought Steve Howe was playing a Gibson 335 on that album. It was like, correct use of console when you have multiple buses in the mix is treat every individual place as its own little subconsole. So if you're doing sub-mixes down to a final bus, previously I would be like, run stuff inside console. Now that it's doing filtering, you're better off not doing that. So now that it's doing filtering, any combination of console 7 channel and console 7 cascade feed into either the final 2 bus or a submix with console 7 bus at the top of the submix. Unity gain between them, and so on. And that's taking things out of console, at which point you can do anything you want in the subs. And then the output of those sub buses get their own version of console 7 channel or console 7 cascade if you want to go crazy with distortion of everything. And that goes to the 2 bus, which has console 7 bus. So the correct use of console, now that we're doing the filtering between every distortion stage, is more filtering the more distortion stages you have. So you basically just always sandwich the summing bus with the console parts and go from there. Hertz EQ. I don't understand what that is. That sounds more like fast Fourier transform. You can do that. You can use a fast Fourier transform. I don't have that mastered at this time, but other people have done it. Also called spectral processing. And what it does is it divides stuff up into these little bins, much like if you're making an MP3. And the more bins you use, the closer you get towards notching out individual hertz. The trouble is, what you're going to get when you're processing in that manner sounds a lot more like MP3s. It's not as great as you'd think. So one of the alternatives, I've been starting to get towards the direction of being able to complete my thought. Forgive me, but I promise you. Have some respect for someone more forgetful than yourself, and I'm not done. I'll get a copyright strike for that. That's a They Might Be Giants song. Close to the Edge, Steve Howe's guitar playing. Is it really a 335 that he used on Close to the Edge rather than the Gibson ES-175, which is the big hollow body? No, it's not. He used a ES-345. And the difference there is that has an electronic circuit called the Gibson Veritone that is wildly unpopular. And Joku Sekavan is exactly correct. It is a notch filter. People hate this control, but B.B. King used it. B.B. King, The Thrill Is Gone, or whatever, the guitar soloing that he uses, the sound, his primary sound routinely uses this notch filter. B.B. King used it like a rolling off the tone control, but with the extreme highs still peeking through. As you change the capacitors on this filter, the Gibson Veritone style filter, it is straight up a notch filter. It's a capacitor and a choke, also a coil, also an inductor, to ground. And that's a very simple circuit. It's a very good sounding circuit. And it is about the narrowest Q factor you can get, which is like when you have the perfectly resonant circuit that way, all it's doing is notching out the exact point at which it resonates. And in the area around that, it's going to start pulling out energy. But it's a very tightly defined resonant circuit that's notching stuff to ground. You can also make a drum sound by creating a more electronic-based twin T circuit, which is a notch filter in the feedback loop of a... is that how it goes? Notch filter in the feedback loop of an op amp? I think it would actually be the opposite. It would be the notch filter obstructing the sound, and so the only feedback you can get is through the notch filter. Regardless, that's how you make kick drum sounds. You ping the circuit that will just ring at that frequency. And when you do that, what you get is a sine wave output, and you can make a kick drum out of that with electronic circuitry, such as your 808 or whatever. It's a very simple process. And I'm going to be diving into more of that as we start getting into the hardware hacking. That is also continuing to progress. I have more wire now. More wire came in, so now I have a stack of spools of 10,000 feet of wire that's taller than me. I have 8 out of 10 of the kinds that I was looking for and a lot of the other parts that I needed. And I'm really moving towards putting the rubber to the road there. But this Steve Howe, yes, close to the edge, BB King, Gibson Veritone, notch filter. I've ordered one from a place that makes sort of a knockoff version of that, because if you try to buy the real Veritone, it can be expensive, even though people normally didn't like them. People didn't like them because it took something away from the sound. But I am pretty much absolutely convinced that a whole pile of the tones, maybe most of the tones, on Close to the Edge are the Gibson ES345 going into an overdriven amplifier but using this notch filter. And that's what gives it this color and tone and intensity and stuff. And I bet there's a lot of things that could be done with that. You do sort of the low mid one where it's nothing but bassy rumble and also a sort of crunchy, gritty sound. And then you distort that a little bit. And you get the beginning to Siberian Katru. And I never knew that that was something he might have done to get that sound. I just knew it was awesome and amazing and I liked it. Nothing would please me more than to be able to jam or throw together little ideas, prog rocky style ideas, using some of this instrumentation that gets into the zone of the things that I like. It could combine stuff like that with the Rickenbacker tones that I'm using the Chris Squire Rico sound technique of running one pickup to one amp and another pickup to another amp. And any bass can do that. If you have a bass with 2 pickups, you can wire up a stereo plug and have your bass do that as well. And the drum thing where, as much as I like Bill Bruford's sound, I'm also very fond of some of the heavier Led Zeppelin style of sounds. And I'm starting to get into the zone of being able to do that. So it's all kind of coming into a direction where I'm getting some of that together. Let me glance over. As long as I'm chattering away for 2 hours instead of coding, I might as well answer questions at the same time. So let's do that. Lorenzo, can you put what's this beginning? What's this? Nailed it. That is exactly correct. I don't know what all in the same instance means, but when you say, so can you put console 7 channel on each individual track, etc. Yep, nailed it exactly. You got it right. You law cascade. Act as a gate that goes 1-1 transformer. I don't understand that part. Have I tried to connect an audio signal to 10,000 feet of wire and listen if the resistance does something interesting to the frequencies? Well, the resistance is going to be like probably a kilohertz or so. I don't think I have access to the end of the wire on these spools. The funny thing about it is, if I did have access to the inside of this spool and could get the end of the wire out, and access to the outside of the spool, I would have a giant inductor, a giant air core inductor. So that's all that is it would just be a huge ass coil. So we do know what that does, is an inductor suppresses high frequencies, and the resistance doesn't really do anything to the frequencies. The resistance makes it quieter. It gets in the way of audio coming through. Yeah, I don't understand what the same instance means in your context there. Fotis is a man after Dave Pixley's heart as far as the beautiful sonic destruction ever. I do hope that the stuff that I make continues to make that sort of thing available, because I know how much fun it is. Yeah, so before we get into trying to put together a new plugin, I do have my notes for it, so now I know what I'll be calling it, which is Preponderant. And what will interest you to know is that this new plugin, Preponderant, will be my take on a soothe / Gullfoss / etc. type thing. It will be my take on the automatically balance your audio for you to make sound betterizer. The difference is that Preponderance will operate also like Hertz Eq, because it seemed to me that that would work. So what you'll have is a thing where you can dial in narrow focuses on band passes, but you're running 3 of them in parallel. And you can make them be really narrow to get into the zone of what the sound ought to be. You construct it out of this narrow high, this narrow mid, this narrow low, move them around until they're in useful places. The reason I'm calling it Preponderant is because that's out of a old Tim Gillies audio thing. And by that I mean MP3. He did the Slipperman things where he was talking about how to get ultimate heavy guitar tones. And he's talking about EQing and saying, narrow down your filter frequencies. Use a really powerful parametric EQ, narrow down your filter frequencies, start sweeping them around. And what you're looking for is areas of power and areas of preponderant energy. Namely, the place where the lows are resonating the most is not necessarily the place where the lows are doing the most good. The place where the mid-range is honking the most is not necessarily the place where the mid-range is sounding best. So you can make stuff be super loud by taking the stuff that is resonating the hardest, which is the kind of thing that Gullfoss or whatever would automatically turn down, and resisting that. But you can also pick which bits are going to be coming through. So it would be kind of similar to that type of thing, except for that you're dialing stuff in. And then having done so, what you'd be doing is A, widening it out so that it was no longer so incredibly focused in on a sound. But B, since there are 3 separate little band passes in there, they should automatically adjust each other's levels. Not so much in the sense of that they are individually compressing, so much as that they are individually adjusting each other to balance. Rather than simply making stuff louder, they're adjusting each other's relative gains, and that becomes the form of compression, meaning that it does the Gullfoss, soothe, etc. style thing of, oh hey, all the frequencies should be about the same, right? Except for not, because they'll all be more resonant. So yep, I'll start that today after I tell you some more things that are also being worked on at the moment. There's a lot of things. Without having to create a project for each bus. Good Lord. Do you mean that you were making a project and submixing everything down to its own little mix and then having to make a new project to load the new mixes in like stereo tracks and then do that? Yeah, you do not. You can have them all in the same instance. You're using aux sends, essentially sub buses. A lot of people know how to do that. I can also talk you through that. I'm not exactly sure what you're using. People are having a lot of problem with Cubase lately in my plugins, apparently. But most DAWs should let you run to a sub-channel or some form of internal bus, at which point the buses should come up in the DAW as if they were other tracks, and you can put plugins on those as well. And then you send the output of the bus to the tuba, the final bus. So yeah, you should be able to do that all in the same instance. Absolutely. Life should not have to be that kind of hell for you. You should be fine. I was talking about all of this yes and songs and things and all that kind of stuff. And I found that it was kind of more fun than I expected doing the last track, although it's still like ages between doing those. But it felt kind of like, wow, this is kind of fun, and I'm also overthinking it. Like I'm trying to do it in a certain way. There's no reason I couldn't just make up something. And then I can play basic things quite easily. I'm just trying to make it more difficult for myself. And what if I came up with a way to make structure and figure out how to do that so that I could just sort of improvise a song structure. Oh my God, that's a lovely one. Man, oh boy. Does basic filtering an instrument or voice affect the console process drastically? I don't know. Usually I would be filtering before and not necessarily inside the console process, but it all works basically the same way. I don't know how to make sub-buses in Reaper, but that's what you would be doing. Look into using multiple, like, somebody is calling that process Browerization, probably Brower, if I'm not mistaken. And the idea is like mix everything down to internal buses that have all their own processing, all of which needs to be different kinds of compressors, and just grind everything into the ground and then mix those buses together into the final bus and blah, 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 blah. And everything has to be distorted and everything has to be compressed, and it's all kind of like, oh my God, dude, too much. But if you find Browerization in Reaper, they will be telling you how to do those internal buses by the very nature of it. You don't have to do that process. You don't have to do it the way they did, but you'd have to set up the internal bus structures, and apparently Tony knows how to do it as well. So that is very doable. You should be able to do it. Enough of the coffee for now, till I make more. Console 7 will work in a project running at 44.1K sample rate. The filtering will not be particularly useful. There was somebody who was desperately asking me to do a version without the filtering, and I was like, that's the whole point of this thing. But honestly, it's slightly more efficient not to be checking every sample for whether to do the filtering or not. So I'm kind of inclined to just stick with that. There was, however, another possibility that I didn't pursue, where I was going to do an averaging technique, which in fact is here. We don't see them right now because I'm still talking and showing things. I believe I am still in the main camera. Yep. So I'm still talking and showing things, but there is a thing on my desktop that says Console 7 S bus, Console 7 S VST bus. I got surprisingly far with the version of Console 7 using entirely a simple averaging technique that would just do like a simple averaging at 96K and either two or four stages of averaging at 192K. The deal with that is I stopped doing it because it was bleeding off highs even more than the biquad, and because it wasn't a very good block as far as super highs was concerned compared to the biquad. But that was checking as to what sample rate you were at. meaning that if you ran that version of Console 7 at 44.1 or 48K, it would not filter. So I can look into that as a follow-up. In fact, I can probably, if people are really into that, I can look into it as another variation. I'll do a certain amount of busy work as far as like building it into a new form of the plugin, because it needs to have a new identification factor and stuff. But that is a version where if you ran it at 44.1K, it wouldn't even try to filter, but everything else is the same. Coding and programming. Also, there are some other things about coding and programming. I have a game project that's been sitting for like over a year now, not finished up. And I'm going to be showing you something momentarily regarding a project I'm pursuing that has to do also with those circles of chord changes and things. I want to make a computer program that can take melody notes and start showing you what chords could go along with those melody notes as you play. I'd really like to do that. I'd like to do it with a computer program rather than some paper-oriented thing, because it would be too cumbersome to do on paper. But I've not had time to start doing it. But if I did, I would be doing it in the Godot engine, the Godot game engine, because that's the kind of thing where you can throw it together, and it's the kind of thing where it's an open source project so people can have it and do stuff with it. And furthermore, I've recently learned that it's apparently fairly straightforward to put your GitHub, this game thing that I'm talking about literally is already on GitHub. But apparently, and I haven't learned all the details about this, if you upload your GitHub, if you upload your Godot engine project, your Godot engine game, as HTML5 to GitHub, it can be played off of the internet. It can be played as a web page off of GitHub servers. And that's exciting to me, because I'm already doing, like, everything is in Airwindows, and Airwindows is only held together by me. And I mentioned in the video, I have a personal friend who was not super close to me, but was somebody that I knew in real life and cared about and stuff, who has died in the last couple of days, which sucks. His girlfriend is posting a lot of things in Facebook, memoriam type stuff. I mentioned in the plugin video that he did this W.H. Auden thing where he was like, I want to recite this poem, and the poem was like, oh, now he is gone. The world will never be the same. This man is no longer with us. And like, yeah, cool. But it spoke to me in that was not what I wanted for myself. What I would want for myself is dozens of people charging ahead excitedly with the stuff that they have built, that I helped them build. Yeah, I know, it sucks. I am glad that I was nice to him when I had the chance. Because I spent some time being nice or working with other people who were having I ran across people who were having personality conflicts with him, and I was like, hey, slow down. No. Wait, it's probably fine. Don't get caught up in this. And you may be grateful that you were spiritual about it rather than turning it into a big war or something like that, which I think worked. And I'm glad now, because it's like, yeah, if I spared him personality conflicts and battles during the last months of his life, go me. Sometimes that's just how that works out. But as far as GitHub is concerned, like, when my life runs out and I'm not making any more of these videos or any of that kind of stuff, Airwindows.com will eventually go pfoot because nobody will be paying for it any longer. And I need for there to be more out there that is still benefiting people. And so I'm leaning heavily into GitHub because that's run and owned by Microsoft now. And they stand to benefit from having huge repositories of people's open source code. They'll keep that going. I don't have to worry about that going away. And the neat thing about the Godot engine and running stuff off of HTML5 is that you can have your project be on GitHub, which Microsoft is paying for. And then you can have it be open source. And then you can have the runnable thing like building the melody to chord generator thing that I was talking about that I don't really have started yet, but when I get that going, if I make something that's really good, if I host it on GitHub, anybody who wanted to use it, even if it became very popular, even if it was like, wow, 10,000 people tried to use this today, your server fell over and went pfoot, sorry, or you're hosted on an Amazon instance, here's a $10,000 bill for this month because your thing got popular. If it's hosted on GitHub, that can't happen. Microsoft ends up being on the hook for that stuff. So, the chord thing is interesting. I've been going deeper and deeper into that one over the years, and I've really gotten somewhere. But the structure thing is also interesting. Have you heard of the phrase abacab? It's a song by Genesis. It is a song structure that is based on the concept of verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. That is the hit song structure. If you took little cards and set them up, this is the hit song structure. A, B, A, B, C, B. You can write it down on cards, and this is your ultimate hit song. You know, you arrange your verses and choruses like this, or fail. Or you could randomly switch it around. So you got like, okay, chorus, then 2 verses in immediate succession, and then 2 choruses and out in a bridge. And that is another possible structure, but it would kind of suck. It wouldn't work nearly as well. Could you make a game out of arranging chunks of music or whatever and setting up rules where if you made something like this, you could set up conditions under which it's like, oh yeah, this is like a straight flush in poker or whatever. This is a winning hand of this song structure game. And there's an easy way to spot something happening in that there's 2 separate places where things are repeating. You've got verse repeating once. It's verse, something else, verse. So it's in sort of the same position. And then chorus repeats actually 3 times. Chorus happens on the end of each thing. Now you'll notice they have these in colors. It's red and orange and yellow. There's also something more to that because you can have different elements where you'd be dealing out different cards and figuring out how this kind of stuff works. And if you had more complicated things going on, then you could arrange the structure like that, and it starts getting into your prog rock song structure. It's like, okay, our structure is A, D, E, A, C, B, A, B. That's a long proggy song that keeps throwing changes at you. Would it be good? I don't know. And if we're talking about proggy things, what would happen if we took like a bigger deck of cards? This is from a previous attempt that I had of making something that you could play as a music game There's words written on all these. Doing a little math. Got my little math stuff here. If you have only two things, then the only thing you can do is AB. So that's one option. If you have three things, you can have ABs, ACs, and BCs. There's three of those, so it's two more. If you have four different things, A through D, AB, AC, AD, BC, BD, CD, so there's six of those. And it keeps increasing to where, in an interesting way, where it's like A through E, you got 10 combinations. And these are combinations of two successive things that don't repeat each other. A through F, that's 15 combinations. A through G, it's 21 combinations. A through H, 28 combinations. A through H is 8 different kinds of things. What I've got here is A through E, which is 5 different kinds of things, and it's a smaller number, although I did double it up, which is probably what you would do, because like with Abacab, part of the concept of that is you get to repeat a block once, but you don't necessarily get, you don't get like Abacab. It wouldn't necessarily be good. So you'd build your decks with 2 instances of everything. I wouldn't know whether it's Catalan numbers or not, but what I would know is I figured out a cool way of arranging all of this. You can see all the crossouts, and I've been struggling to get this right, and I feel it's coming together, so I might be spending some time on this week. You can use the color codes from like resistor color codes or my wire colors or the colors of the rolls of electrical tape that I've got, basically different kinds of colors, and associate them with things. For instance, if you left out black and white, the remaining ones, and there's 8, and like I said, doing all the variations of, one thing followed by a different thing, you have 28 different variations if you're working on 8 categories of thing. If you do 2 of each of those, that's 56 cards. Like these, this is a smaller number of cards, but like these, but you'd have 56 of them. It would cover 8 different variations of color. And your associations with these would be brown is earth, red is fire, orange is lava, yellow is sand, green is grass, blue is water, violet is smoke. Ooh, it's the purple smoke, right? Prog rock, that's an obvious one. And gray is stone. So I was trying to figure out how to associate with those things and ground away until I had 3 adjectives for each of these. And the 3 adjectives form, 6 different polarities, and every single description of this occurs twice in the collection of 8 things, and no 2 things are ever shared. So earth is kinds of music that are heavy, simple, and rich. You'd compose stuff like that. If you had I'll continue. Fire would be hot, light, and complex. So for fire, you get like Heart of the Sunrise, Rush's The Spirit of Radio. The fast stuff in the beginning is definite fire. It's hot, it's light on its feet, it's complex. There's a lot of notes going on, and it's just show-offy, it's flashy. And that would be red. You draw a red, and it's like, okay, this stage must do this. Orange, or lava, would be heavy, hot, and dense. So both fire and lava are hot, but they're different qualities. Lava would be more like your Black Sabbath kind of stuff. Heavy metal thunder, man. And the heaviness is its own characteristic. It's opposite to fast, nimble fire type stuff. Sand would be rigid, empty, and stark. So less elements, no improvisation. Rigid means it's more sort of mechanical and not as much happening. Arrangement, much simpler. Empty. Grass would be chill, complex, and rich. I'm thinking kind of fractal type stuff there. Grass would be like in Tales from Topographic Oceans when they drop back into the little noodly stuff and it's comforting, it's nice. The richness means there's a lot going on, and it's complicated because of the fractal quality. Individual grass blades, there are many of them. So in grass, you'd have lots of improvisation, but you'd also have lots of other stuff going on. Water is formless, simple, and stark. That's like you're close to the edge when you drop into the organ part. No beat in formless, just nothing. Smoke, formless, light, and empty. I was going to put all kinds of like weird associations in there, but I'm thinking more like in Heart of the Sunrise when they go rapidly back and forth between and then you get the Rick Wakeman stuff where like that alternates between fire and smoke. So it alternates between the hot, light, and complex. You could also call that dense lava heavy, but the rapidity of it is what makes me think fire. It's all very subjective. This is to inspire people. It's like the Brian Eno cards. So the formless, light, and empty is those kinds of effects coming out and not just dropping into it, but it's still formless. It's still break the tempo. Have stuff be happening that's not related to tempo. Formless, nothing so specific going on. And then stone, or gray, would be chill, rigid, and dense. So a lot of rock music is like that. A lot of Led Zeppelin, for instance, will come off like that, where it's chill, like grass is chill. It's not all aggression and flash and stuff. It's rigid, like sand is rigid. Sand can be made into glass, so it's kind of clear, empty, stark. But stone will be rigid in the sense of, riffs and power chords and stuff. And then obviously stone dense, more along the lines of your heavy type stuff, although rigid and dense is not necessarily the same thing as heavy. Heavy is like your bluesy dragging of the beat. There's like a flavor to it, whereas rigid and dense as a groove would be more along the lines of your heavy metal, heavy rock style thing. And the whole idea, and I could see whether this works or not. I may experiment with it, because years ago I did experiments with a password generator where it would spit out things like QR3X921 and okay, this is now my new jam. The first piece of it is Q. What's Q going to sound like? I'll make up something. And oblique sound structure strategies, exactly. And 3, okay, this is obviously in 3, and I'll do that. And I would make up a structure on the spot. I did a limited number of things. They weren't all good, but some of them were like considering that I did these in like a day. The amount of structure in them was astonishing. And they still exist, but now they're on a Mediafire account. So what I would be doing is dialing myself a little hand out of these and going, okay, here's my 5 cards. I'm going to play 4 of them and make a structure. And I've got like A, C, D, E, B, E, and a lot of E. And I would go, okay, so That's water. So this is going to be, there's going to be a lot of formless in here. And since I have these, the adjectives clash with each other, like simple and complex are opposites, chill and hot are opposites, empty and dense are opposites, formless and rigid are opposites, light and heavy are opposites, stark and rich are opposites. So can you construct a song where it goes from like, let's see, I'm trying to see whether anything would really make sense here. Fire to lava, and both of them are hot. So you'd have an element that consisted across the entire track, and you'd go from one thing to another thing, but it would be consistent with that. And to what extent would you have these adjectives clashing with each other or reinforcing each other? Could you make a song that continued throughout and all of it felt complex? Or all, like, let's see, fire and grass both count as complex. So if you had this transition here, E to D to A to C, or blue to green to red to yellow, it would go from formless and simple and stark to chill, complex, and rich to hot, complex, and light. So some of it would clash and some of it would be similar, like it would keep this complexity going. And then it would hit C, which would be yellow, which would be sand, that would be rigid, empty, and stark. So it would go from this is why I need to write a program for this. I kind of have it in my head as to these are things you could do, and you could calculate it out so that you'd butt these things up against each other. And on the cards, even if I made physical cards, I'm thinking about like getting physical cards made up and doing the artwork for them nicely, and then those get to be like the fundraising fancy Airwindows things. Like, I'll make these physical things, I'll send them to people, they will be sold directly and they will be pricey, but then you also get exactly the same thing as a free computer program on the internet. So if you wanted to be a collector and have a special thing that I personally made for you, that would finally be a way of doing that. But then you would also be able to have exactly the same functionality as a program hosted on GitHub and running there. But yeah, I need to write a program for this because it's too much for me to work out in my head. You can do a CBAC, or yellow, orange, red, yellow sequence. And if you did that, it would be going from this rigid, empty, stark kind of thing to like heavy metal, hard and dense and stuff, to even more intense and complicated and rapid, and then boom, back to the stark and empty again. That could be a very cool sequence of textures and arrangement concepts going into each other. Because the other thing that I keep having problem with in writing music is I struggle terribly with arrangement. I tend to want to put one of everything into a track and then jam with all of them, and what you get is always the same. And you can go like, oh, I'm going to jam all these things, and then I'll take out the bits that weren't good. But that doesn't really work. At least I don't find that it works very well. So I need to start with the structure, start with the arrangement, and go like, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm only going to play electric piano on this part, because this is the part that is the color blue. This is the formless water part. So I'm putting a lot of reverb on, and I'll play the electric piano, and we're going to transition into this sound that I know how to make, but I don't have to play all these other things and then delete them. I'll just do literally only what I intended from the start, and I'll set it up using this little card game to make stuff up. And it also ties into the idea of finishing the cheap-ass rhymes dictionary the lyric dictionary that I was putting together based on the top 100 words in the English language, which is a thing that XKCD did. That is noted in their Upgoer 5 book, XKCD, where they're explaining all these scientific concepts using only these words. It's really quite a thing. They have good. The Randall Munroe has good books that way, and I'm about halfway through making the lyric dictionary for that. When I have finished, it will be possible for me to do this structure thing, come up with something where I can write music and place the structural elements in place, so I'll have something to start from, and then throw on just lyrics about whatever and be able to look up rhymes and things for it using these very basic words and be like, okay, so I'm gonna say I want to make a song about resonance. Resonance is not in one of those words, but I'll put it in the chorus. I'll think of something that I can say about resonance in the chorus, and then I'll build all the verses around stuff with these vowel sounds. Like maybe I want to do a death metal song about resonance. So I'll use the word resonance and build it into the chorus, and then all the verses have to be based on sounds. So that all of the and yeah, you can see why I get overwhelmed at times. It's too much going on up here. As long as I'm still alive, I will be pursuing it all, though. And on that note, it's 12:34, so I could take another half an hour or so and start the new plugin. Boop. That should have taken care of that. I can check, though. Yep. Seems legit. Yeah, I did the password generator thing for a while. And yeah, no, I struggled to create original music. I wouldn't be surprised if this all was helpful to you or anybody, because I face exactly the same problems. I mean, that's why Brian Eno did his card set, is because he struggled too. We all struggle. We're looking for ways to get into the thing, because once you start, you can keep moving. But it's tough to get rolling sometimes. Funnily enough, I just listened to Sun O parentheses. I was listening to some of that bizarre, I mean, that stuff is interesting to me because I was like, oh, look, this band always does this. Kind of cool. I could do this all day long if I wanted to. I haven't been wanting to, and so they're doing it. Not only that, I would probably never want to do only that, so they're doing it. And it doesn't matter what I can do, that doesn't make me them, because they're the ones that wanted to do this thing, and that's what they're doing. It's like heavy metal ambient music is what I've heard it described as. And you can build that into the song structure stuff, except for their song structure is all one color. Just forever this. You can use plugins like bus colors in the middle of all of that kind of stuff. I don't really care. I wouldn't recommend using bus colors because I think I'm doing better with the stuff that I'm doing now. Treat bus colors as, yeah, this is another distortion device, and it also adds a impulse response. That's pretty much all it is. So if you really needed to add color to something, then basically use that. Well, I mean, Joku, the thing about the natural language is that you get more bits. If you have a long phrase, there's more letters in that than a really impossible thing. You can have additional possible states of the complicated, difficult passwords with the numbers and symbols and stuff. But just having more digits is what really matters. That's really what that's about. Being allowed to have more digits. If you can get more digits, it doesn't matter whether they're all like lowercase letters or what. Probably helps to have spaces. But yeah, if you pick a particular passphrase, that's going to have more digits and it's just going to continue to be better than a short, more unpronounceable password. I wouldn't say that I was against bus colors so much as just like don't overstate it. All it is the impulse response, and there's any number of ways to do stuff like that, but it's also a limiting factor. It's a coat of paint. There's nothing really stopping you from throwing it in the middle of, because like with Console 7 Cascade, I really got a lesson in why people would want to do this distort everything into everything else and then distort it more. I really got a lot of, I was almost talking about factorial numbers because I was working out how many cards I would need to represent a given number of progressions from one state to another. Like if you had, red, orange, yellow, green, and blue, and you wanted to make a deck of cards in which you would have 2 colors in each card and it never repeated a color and it never repeated a card, it would give you this many things. And so I worked that out, but it's not exactly factorial, it's just sort of related in some way. And I did work it out, like 2 colors, you only have one choice of combination of the 2. 3 colors, you have 3 options for going from one to another without repeating them. 4 colors, you have 6 options. 5 colors, you have 10 options. 6 colors, you have 15. 7, you have 21. And 8 colors, you have 28 options of every one color to every other color without repeating one. And then since you're doing the song structure thing, you need to be able to have abacab as like a winning hand. So you have to have 2 instances of AB to be going AB, AB, AC. And then you can represent abacab and figure out rules under which that is a high score. So yeah, song structure card game. I need to do this in 2 ways. And one way is figure it out and then code it into a Godot engine thing where people can actually play it and upload that onto GitHub so that people can actually play it. And then the other part of it is to do the card game and then actually spend the money to get it printed up as an actual card game. And that would be the one where I would be like, okay, all of you people who are like independently wealthy and want to support Airwindows but have never done anything to pander to you, this is your chance. This is the card game that only you can have because everybody else plays it online or makes their own version or whatever. And they would be purchasing the decks of these fancy cards, and it would be in such a way that it would actually earn me some money that I can use to give other people stuff. So that's kind of the plan there. It's like I finally hit on a thing that I can do where people who actually have serious money can get something special just for them without hurting people who don't. Because it's just like playing Magic the Gathering or something. You can spend thousands of dollars on building amazing Magic the Gathering decks to bring into tournaments and competitions and stuff. And all of that, as far as I can tell, is available playing, Hearthstone, which is the online version. So there's always the virtual. There is always the ability to do the thing in virtual terms. But there is also the direct market of being able to do the thing with physical cards and being able to get something which is like, wow, this is really cool. This is my special thing. It's like a nice little opposite to my intention to get together perf board and IC chips. And I've got, like I mentioned, now I have a stack of spools of wire that's taller than I am. I have 8 of the colors I'm going to need for making the... Now what I need is a dispenser stand where I can actually unroll these wires. But for a time being, I am getting together the colors of wire that I would need for the purpose of being able to straight up give stuff like that away. All I need is the packaging and the mailing and stuff so that I can ship stuff very cheaply, to the point where if you catch up with me on the coding stream, I can go, mail me your physical address, I'm going to send you a care package, and you can start wiring this stuff up for me, or with me while I start doing it. But for now, we don't have that open, do we? And we don't care about the giant jar of LEDs that I have for that same purpose. We have a pile of things as in terms of stuff like there is the Console 7S VST bus, which is the earlier version. It's not much point building this yet, but this has the same identity as the existing console channel, but the way it's implemented is different in that this is the one where we've got this stuff in here, and it's checking the sample rate, and if it's below a certain sample rate, it doesn't try to average at all. And if it's above a certain sample rate, it does a neat average, and in so doing, if you run enough of these, it'll start bleeding off the highs, but it will have very good transient performance relative to the biquad. And it'll also have a sort of darker tone, and it'll also run much more efficiently than the biquad-based version. So we've got this kind of stuff sitting around. This is something that I could do if people really need a low gain version, or not a low gain version, a low CPU version of Console 7. Although it might not save you perfectly because you're still running 2 sine calculations rather than earlier versions of console that just ran 1. But let's start in our last 15 minutes here, the new project. And this is, somebody was mentioning, please do something from scratch kind of thing. Here's what I'm doing. When it says audio unit effect or audio unit instrument, I have edited these files to be my template files that are available on GitHub. You can get these, or at least earlier versions of these. I'm not sure they're up to date. The one with CocoView is for stereo, and this one is not with stereo. And we're going to do it not with stereo because it's an audio unit. And it says start from this template. I'm using the template that I came up with, and we're calling it preponderant because nobody else has used that name for a plugin, and because this is based on Tim Gillies' concepts of areas of power versus areas of preponderant energy. This is the soothe-alike, the one where it's meant to act or sound kind of like soothe, because it'll find areas of preponderant energy and maybe it will reduce them. Or at the very least, if you're just picking 3 areas at random and one of them has preponderant energy, meaning it's too loud, it will automatically compensate so that the low, like if it's mid-range, the low and the high bands will get turned up to cover for the fact that there's more energy coming through. So it will do a kind of Gullfoss/soothe-like thing, but in an Airwindows style way, where it's giving you tightly focused bands of resonant energy to construct a sound out of. Because that's what I had with Hertz Eq. Hertz Eq was just a whole series of tightly resonant filters, and you constructed a sound based off of a sort of tracery of those. It was just cumbersome because you were assigning like 6 resonant frequencies at random, and it wasn't really balancing them. It was just putting them through. We will call this preponderant. We will launch it or start it. We will go to preponderant version H and rename its identity in the DAW. Because the DAW is going to look for this and go like, okay, The means Airwindows, and subtype means the identity of this. So this needs to not match anybody else's subtype. So I usually use a variation on the name of the plugin. Prep seems fine. If I ever did a plugin called Preparation, I would be in trouble and have to worry about duplicating that, and I'd have to pick a different name. But right now, I don't think I have a single thing. Or it could be Perpo. Maybe that would be better. Preponderant ID is PRPO. Again, like with the passwords, what you get is 4 letters, and these 4 letters, even treated as all lowercase, which I've been doing, still covers all the Airwindows plugins, because 26 times 26 times 26 times 26 is way bigger than 200. There's room to do lots of possible identities here, even when the consoles are all sort of sequential. This is CNSA, CNSB, and so on and so forth. They keep extending onwards. So we'll save that. And now what we've got here is me needing to move all these over to where you can see them. But also, this is the guts of where we work. C++ and H. H file does this. I'm setting up a bunch of sliders that I can start with. No. Number of bands of vanilla. TOT is also another inspiration here. I saw them doing that. I was like, cool, okay, cool. You're doing a Soothe-alike, you're doing a Goldfoss-alike, right on. This will not be modifiable. This will be 3 bands. And the reason is the purpose it's trying to achieve is best found by, it's going to be easier to do it, and it'll be easier to get to a sound if you're thinking of it in terms of bass stuff, mid-range stuff, treble stuff. I'll probably make it so that you can overlap pretty hard. Like the treble and the bass will reach right to mid-range in order to do it, and the mid-range band should cover pretty much the full range. So you can overlap them, you can do weird things with them, but the idea is that it's got to be approachable. It's got to be constrained to where things just fall out of it and sound good. Here's a number of parameters. This is what we've got to start with as far as our reserved variables that continue onwards from sample frame to sample frame. Here's our parameters again. Here's how they're set up to be 0 to 1. This is the same as in VST. Here we're defining our initial random seed. This is the code that does that. That means that all the instances will have their own random seed, and that all the random seeds will be larger than 16386, because that makes them go more random quicker. Otherwise, it'll take them a little longer to launch. And Tiote Bo is a new Voxengo thing. You should look it up. It looked pretty cool to me. It's Voxengo's answer to the sort of Soothe Goldfoss styley thing. Yep, Tiote. I don't remember. It's an acronym for something. I don't remember what it is. And here we have our sliders and our line of code that makes all the sliders be used by something. And here is our template. So this is where we start with that kind of stuff. Since we are doing 3 band passes, we're going to start by opening a AU plugin project. P for plugins. And we're going to pick one of the biquads. And so it's going to be B I'm looking for. Biquad triple gives me 3 instances of a biquad. This needs to go into the preponderant H. So there's a start. close that. Then biquad. This needs to go into reset because all of those things need to go to 0 when you begin the plugin, otherwise things can be bad. Save that too. And then the last thing is, if I straight up copy this over, then it will be literally preponderant, will be biquad triple, and will work and act and everything exactly as biquad triple does. So we can start with that and then go from there. Copy it. I'm not going to keep this. This is code for low shelves and high shelves and things, which exists in some of the biquad filters as example code. You can paste that up into the top if you were building this and get the desired result. But preponderant, let's see, where did I start with? Did I start with, I guess I'll find out, won't I? If I paste this in, we still got that, and I failed a little bit because I need one of these, but not there. That's messy. I'm going to undo it. There, now we're back. We pasted it the wrong way. It needs to be from here. And now I've got this. Now this is a plugin that is literally biquad triple. And this is how I get started on some of this stuff. I know that I'm going to be wanting to work with a 3 biquad filters. They're not going to do what this does, but they're going to do something. And I'm going to take this out, it being a whole bunch of comments. I have all these parameters available because I didn't change this part up here, so there's still 10 sliders on this to run. And what I'm going to do is move some of this stuff around. Like I'm going to take this type stuff out and leave only the band passes. Again, I'm getting a hardware circuit for my guitar that's going to have a notch filter, so I might end up doing something where it's the plug-in version of Gibson Veritone, and there's settings for making notches of the relevant frequencies, and I'll set it up to match, and then you'll be able to put that in your computer and do that. But what we're doing here is somewhat different. And this is making all of these be identical. Which is not what we want to do, but I'll worry about that later. So we don't need int type. I'm going to make something be unique about this before I stop today. So we got parameter 2 is our frequency control that's currently being used for literally everything. Parameter 3 is our resonance control. That's going to be shared. And wet will function. We got our dry sample. We're using our dry sample if we want to. We are also doing the console 5 thing. I'm thinking maybe I'm going to leave that out of this one because I would have to put an ultrasonic filtering to do it properly. I've got this kind of for things like isolator where I want it to have a more textural sound, but this I won't necessarily want to have that kind of tonality. I don't know. We'll see. This is a little closer to like the ultrasonic filters or whatever, where I'll want it to do its thing quite accurately. So we're going to comment that out. We've already changed it from being biquad triple. And now we're going to change it a little more, and then we're going to run it. So this is running all of those separate things. I immediately see something I'm going to want to do. And I think I see how I'm going to want to do it. Here's our input sample coming in. We're doing this various processing using it, and then we're reassigning it. This is why they cascade, is we've got input sample to be temp sample. This is the output of it, but we can also go base sample bid sample and high sample. Now all of these are being fed with exactly the same thing, because we never actually update input sample in the middle of this. So what we're getting is 3 different biquads running in parallel. That's what we wanted, was running in parallel, because they are all bandpass filters. So our output becomes there's our output, there's our dry wet. So that part is now functional. This will now work. We only have to define temp sample once, so this part is still fine. In fact, this might be the guts of our program already, except for we were going to do a balancing factor, which is totally not going to happen today, but maybe next week. And now what we're going to do is wet is now 10. We're going to take out this type 3 because we're not actually selecting this anymore. We're going to take out this extra tab, and we're going to do this 3 times because we're doing 3 distinct band passes, meaning that we won't need to do this anymore. It is, after all, already zeroed out. So this whole thing goes away. We don't want it to be that. Meaning we now want to define this separately. I have never programmed with Excel. And you know what else? This is now resonance, or is it? This is our frequency. I guess this is going to be our resonance. Let's go back and look at the other one. Alrighty, so get parameter 3. We stop it from being 0 because you can't have a resonance of 0. And I feel like maybe up in the settings here, this is no longer going to go from 0 to 1. So let's find out. Parameter 3. What do we got in parameter 3? We've got one where it'll go to 30. Okay. So we can do this, or we can just fool with the sharpness settings as if this was a VST and we had to do it from scratch. Because remember, this does not have to duplicate the behavior of biquad. So what are we going to want to do? We're going to want the value to go up to 30, or at least up to a high number. 30 may be way overkill. And it goes from 0 to 1 now. So what we're going to do is we're going to call it parameter 9 because that exists and we can use it. And we're going to say times 10 and make sure that it is not, well, actually, no, we can fix that too. Parentheses and just add something. Plus 0.5. Our widest, well, no, let's see, 0.1. So our widest setting is when we have it set down to 0, and that's pretty wide. It's not super overwhelmingly wide. Oh, dude, this is the pseudocode. This is the sketching and trying out. And we don't have to use this if statement because we're never going to get it anywhere close to 1. And you know what else? This is our resonance control. We have got 3 different things that are going to need to use that. So they share it. A equals B equals C equals this number. That way, we're doing our wideness control, our resonance control. We can make it be narrower, and that will narrow out all of these. Now, they may need to adjust, because, and I can worry about that later, like if the high frequency band is just way too narrow for low frequencies, what I can do is have like A be like this, and then B be like this times 5, and C be like this times 10, or whatever. And it'll make them scale in an interesting way. But I don't have to worry about that right now, because low resonances are going to be similarly. Well, let's get some of this down, firstly, because I can get it to where we have a making sound thing. And I'm going to get it to where we have a making sound thing. Here's our A, B, and C. Notice I'm also going to have to change get parameter. So now we have a way of putting in the frequency for these 3 things separately. So we're going to use the top 3 controls. That's going to be important because we're inevitably going to end up using that. Currently, they do not focus on particular ranges. They're not really tuned in, but they're 3 distinct resonant controls that we can use now. So that now will work. The resonance is shared. That will work. We do need to make this be, each of these guys has to be calculated out separately. And we're going to take away this redefinition of the variable because it already exists. But this is essentially what we got to do now. And I'm going to speed this up just a hair by going find and replace. Do we have anything elsewhere in this little zone with the capital A that I don't want changed? Nope, that'll be fine. So that's going to be B. If I hold down Option in selection, boop, and now find and replace, and again hold down Option in selection, find and replace A with B, except for now I want C, sorry. And that did it. I can now run this, and it is 3 bandpass filters that I can control the width of all of them. And I'm going to call that a day. This has been an exhausting coding stream, because it mostly wasn't a coding stream. But I can build this, or I can build this the second time around. Remember, the way this version of Xcode works, it doesn't build it in the correct sequence, so it'll give lots of problems, I think. I guess not. Usually it gives lots of problems. And then the second time you build it, it's built enough of its stuff that it knows what it's doing. So here's our preponderant. Option click should hide that. Here's where it came from. Go to the build folder, release, preponderant component. And since this is an old version, I can use it immediately. And we should be able to hear it. And I'll call it a day after that. I may go in and maybe I'll do that before logging off. Airwindows, preponderant. So now these are my frequencies. We'll call this low, medium, and high. 9th is my resonance. And dry wet works too. I can hear that there's a high frequency one. Here's our low frequency. And here's our mid frequency. Very resonant, it's like this. I need them to not overlap all that much and have more usable control ranges. But say we want it so that it's kind of bright here. Our mid-range is kind of in this zone, and our low frequency is this kind of flappy noise. Because you hear this is an area of preponderant energy. But and now that we've done this, we've got this sound, which is very tight bands. We take this control currently labeled 9th and broaden them out to get a basic sound that is going to be more like a proper mix. Compared with dry. It's dry. And here's the effect. It's constructed out of these resonant bands. And then the next thing is to, like if you had it really focused down like this, super deep. The next stage would be to, first of all, label these differently, but then be able to take these, and you hear how the low is basically gone now. And it's all mid-rangey, and then there's the brightness. The next stage, making this be an actual plugin, apart from like controlling all the frequency ranges so that it's easy to use, is to maybe the low and high should go from extreme to whatever the mid-range happens to be at the moment. But the next stage is to take it and have each of these individual bands balance, so it's not just overwhelmingly mid-rangey here. Like it should be able to cut back that mid-range band and boost the low band because the low band is quieter relative to the other two. But it won't be compressing overall, it'll be compressing relative to which is louder than which. And it'll do that on the fly, and it'll do it constantly, so it'll adapt to your sound as it's coming in. And that's the idea. Compared to again, getting the various parameters going nicely is a pretty key point. It needs to be so that the movement of the controls always takes you to useful places. And yeah, before I crawl off and die here, I gotta update this. I'll get back to this later, so. You hear how I wouldn't want to do 4 bands though? Because there's already a lot going on there, and the idea is to broaden it out until it's a more usable sound. And then I'm going to blank some of these, because I can count. I can figure out what belongs where. And when we're finished getting all the controls working right, we'll consolidate them down into however many controls it needs, and delete the rest of them and sort that out. And we're going to call that the new plugin. Not to say that it's the new plugin for next week, because I've got a series of reverb plugins coming out and stuff, but that is the Airwindows take on that type of plugin like Soothe and Gullfoss and Teote and so on, is playing off of Hertz Eq. Playing off of going, let's construct a sound out of tight resonant bands, because then you can have it filling in like the details and like, oh, I hear brightness, I hear lowness, I hear so on and so forth, but tune them in such a way that, again, you can get areas of power rather than areas of preponderant energy, like Tim Gillies used to say in those MP3s. And doing that will give you sounds that will sit in the mix but not get in the way of other stuff in the mix. Like if you have really cluttered mixes, this will be a really great way of taking individual things and going, okay, let me strip this down to just the guts of it, rather than, because it's in a way that makes it the opposite of like Gullfoss or Soothe, and that's the whole point. You don't want to take away like resonant bands of intense energy unless they're the wrong ones. What you want to do is set it up so that your intense resonant bands of energy are exactly what you want and where you want them, and then they leave space for other things to come through. When you do the full-on Soothe Gullfoss type thing, you're smoothing all the resonant bands out with the idea of like it's an MP3 and you need all of the bands to be equally loud, and that's nonsense. You don't. So when we return to this, we will probably figure out how to make the frequency bands appropriately scaled, so you can dial in like a nice narrow low frequency band that correlates to where the high frequency and mid frequency bands are. Otherwise, bass is always going to be too wide and high is always going to be really too narrow, and I should be able to come up with a solution for that, and a solution for having them scale usefully so that your range of adjustment is convenient each way. But and then after that, it's amplifying them relative to each other so that the outputs of each of these bands are always the same relative balance. You always get the same rough amount of lows, you always get the same rough amounts of highs. If that meant you took the highs out to a place where almost nothing is happening, it will just crank them up until it's still balanced. And that ought to do it, I think. So we'll call that a day. Thanks, folks. It's been something. Hopefully, people will enjoy these wild and crazy things that I've been working on. Thankfully, some of them do wind up actually happening, so you can't set your goals so high that you never actually reach any of them. E and F key, I have no idea what that means. Thanks, Lorenzo, and I will see you guys next week.